All right, we got a loaded topic this morning, honesty, especially in this day of age. It seems like this is one thing that there's a lot of different realities about, right? So, I want to talk today about honesty in the context of my experience, both from my upbringing as well as business, and really take a sort of non-traditional approach to exploring this topic and sort of tie it all together. So, how many of you have heard the quote, whether or not growing up or recently, honesty is the best policy? All right, a lot of people. How many people know who that originally comes from? I'll give you a clue. It was a great statesman who's not currently in office. Yeah. Yeah, you got it. Yeah. Ben Franklin said that many years ago, and based on what we know, it's safe to say that Mr. Franklin had a pretty good reputation and he was a pretty good guy. And many would say that he was an honest guy. But today I'd like to challenge Mr. Franklin's assumption of honesty being the best policy. And for starters, the reason why I'm thinking that way is a policy the same thing as honesty? A policy is man-made, whereas isn't honesty a universal truth? Isn't it the one thing that unites all of humanity? I think yes and no. You see, honesty is far more complicated than that. Our definitions of honesty are shaped by our culture, and these definitions have slight variances due to cultural variances as well. So your definition of honesty, fortunately or unfortunately, may be different than my definition of honesty. But in order to understand why this all makes sense or why I'm even saying this, let's take a couple steps back and actually look at my upbringing and maybe how my definitions of this have been shaped. So my journey. All right. So I was born in Vermont, and the Green Mountains of Vermont, beautiful state. But I really don't know the state because I didn't really stay there. I went to Japan at 1 year old in 1987. And then in 1995, I found myself in Singapore. That was in second grade. And then I had a random year in Michigan, my freshman year in college. I quickly got out of Michigan and I went to China, where I met my wife, who's from Philadelphia. Hence, I found myself in Philadelphia. And then once I got to Philadelphia, I really didn't think I was going to stay here that long. I knew nothing about the culture here. I couldn't even point Philadelphia out on a map. I could have drawn the world map by the time I got here, but I didn't know anything about American geography or where Philadelphia was. I just knew that the girl that I had just fallen for was from here, and I figured, what the heck, I'll move to Philadelphia. So then what ended up happening is I stayed here. I started a company here. I got married here. I have kids here. So my background has definitely been impactful to where my journey is and my perspectives on this topic as well. In 2010, as Eric had mentioned, I started United by Blue. United by Blue grew out of a company that I had started back in 2006 while I was halfway in between Michigan and China. I started importing jewelry from China. I speak fluent Mandarin Chinese, so I was importing jewelry directly to the U.S. and selling it. At the time, I wanted to do something good for oceans and waterways. So in my entrepreneurial infancy, I decided to donate 5% of proceeds to ocean and waterway conservation. But I was like 19, 20 years old then, so I didn't really know much about how to do good in this world. And I realized very quickly that there's limitations with donating money versus rolling up your sleeves and doing it on yourself. So long story short, that perspective and that journey led me to start United by Blue to really have a more concrete and tangible impact on the environment and to build a brand that has a lot more depth and staying power than a direct import business importing jewelry and selling it to TJ Maxx. So United by Blue is Philadelphia's outdoor brand. It's not just Philadelphia's brand, but it's found in many different places, and it's been something that has kept me in Philadelphia and further continues to shape my perspective on this as well. So, let's get to this thing. All right, cultures of honesty. So, as I just mentioned, I grew up as a third culture kid in Asia. That basically means that, you know, I'm not from there, but I grew up there, and I have a very different type of culture than here or there. When I moved here, many people would often tell me, "Oh, that was a great experience that you had growing up." And this was, you know, early on when I was 20 or 21, and that used to actually annoy me, because to me it wasn't an experience; it was my life. But it's only recently that I do realize that it was an experience, because as much as I wanted to be a part of the culture that I grew up in, my cultural heritage, my parents, how they raised me in the home, and who my grandparents are, and everything about my background really was rooted in America. So in many ways, I straddled a line between cultures and didn't belong in either places. And I struggled a lot when I came to Philadelphia. One of the reasons why I was only in Michigan for a year is I couldn't take the culture that I was supposed to be in my mind. So this perspective this gives me a lot of perspectives on cultural variances across the world and how people look at different things. One thing I've noticed repeatedly since being in the US for a while now is how people here, myself included, mistakenly think that someone is lying because of cultural variances. The behavior of people can look like we're lying or we're being dishonest, but in reality, those are more rooted in cultural variances than in differences in honesty. A great example of this is in Japan, where I spent 7 years growing up, and I have a sister-in-law that's Japanese, and my brother lives there. So in Japan, for any of you that have been there, yes doesn't always mean yes, and no certainly doesn't always mean no. This is something that I've learned even later in life as I've done business there and have introduced United by Blue products there through distributors. It's one of the more complicated places to do business because of these different definitions of the truth, or of what we define as being honest. So, you know, it's because social harmony is valued above all else, and saving face is more important than sometimes being straightforward. So in many ways, those answers are not necessarily a lie. Those are the way that they communicate. This happens in many other cultures as well throughout the world. It's very rare, in my opinion, from what my experience is, to have a culture of directness, which is what we have here largely in the United States. You know, there's that sense of, you know, speak your mind and radical candor, or, you know, really not holding anything back. I find that to be rather unique to here versus elsewhere. Oh, I'm not flipping through these. So basically, cultures define honestly differently. But cultures can also be destructive, especially to the environment. So my perspective on this, sometimes I feel like it's a little bit contrary to how people want to preserve. You know, we want to preserve cultures. We want to make them last. But in many ways, many of the cultural tendencies of the past may not be exactly the best thing for the planet. So what I see often is cultures hiding behind a veil of cultural heritage in order to continue to do things that are bad for the planet. For example, recently here or around the world, single-use plastics. We have a culture of convenience and wanting to use those plastics basically, and saying that, you know, everybody uses them and therefore it's okay, or they're convenient. We don't trust the water. We have all these issues. To me, that's a really bad thing. But it also goes across cultures. So, for instance, you know, shark fin soup, tiger testicles, and other threatened or endangered species are consumed in Chinese culture. I saw that growing up a lot for various health benefits. But these are unfounded speculative benefits that are based more on superstition and cultural heritage than reality. It's dishonest to think otherwise, in my opinion, because there's scientific truth, if we want to call it, that says otherwise. The same thing goes for things like Japanese and Icelandic whaling. These are oftentimes threatened whale species that, again, humanity is killing on the basis of culture. So these things happen because culture encourages it, and they continue to happen because culture encourages it. And then bringing it back home again, dishonesty to the planet goes beyond killing threatened species. Here in the US, we have a lot of people that deny climate change or refuse to accept the science behind that, claiming it's not the truth. Again, these are people, and these are definitions of honesty and definitions that people stand strongly behind when it comes to what the truth is. It goes across all cultures. This one's even a bit more of a touchy subject, because there's nothing wrong or dishonest about being proud of one's country. For me in particular, again, my upbringing is different because I didn't grow up here, but I'm an American, and I'm proud of what this country stands for and what we do here and how we communicate and all of those things. But there's sometimes extreme forms of nationalism that gives permission to use all means necessary to protect one's own interests. Our not-so-truthful leader is a great example of that, in my opinion. It seems that protecting your own interests means that honesty is optional now. To me, I have a problem with this, probably like many of you in this room do. And just like climate change deniers, making honesty optional distorts reality and selfishly hurts others, oftentimes outside of one's own culture that we're protecting as a result. So just as much as culture can justify dishonesty, it's also a great thing. And oftentimes what you need to look at is the values that underlie a culture that can be a powerful force for good as well. So it's not necessarily the culture, but the values that are what we should be looking at, because those are what define culture. So for me, as a business person, in the business sense, I think about values a lot. That's something that building an organization with 80 plus people now, we have to go back to and revisit and reshape and push for, because values are what unite a culture. They create that culture, whether or not it's a society or a business. So let's look at United by Blues cultures, or values, really quickly. So at United by Blue, we have 4 core values. The first one is sustainability. Everything that we do is done through a lens of sustainability, to do the least amount of harm while still building a legitimate, sustainable business in the business sense as well. Responsibility. Responsibility and sustainability do go hand in hand. You would think that they're somewhat the same. It's responsible to be sustainable. But in many ways, they're different, because responsibility to the business means sometimes making decisions that may not always be the most sustainable. So they're sometimes in contrast with one another. For instance, doing all of our cleanups. We do cleanups on an ongoing basis. Early on in our existence, we were probably doing too many. We were doing too many because we were doing more than the business could support. The mission of removing a pound of trash for every product sold was created in order to keep both the good in check as well as allow the business to fund it in a way that was sustainable. Selling products will innately support the removal of trash through our cleanups. So we had to scale back on, the responsible thing was to do less cleanups, to cancel cleanups and to do less. Sometimes also when it comes to material choice, we're always going after the most sustainable. That's number one. But if it's in contrast sometimes with building a responsible business, if we, for instance, can't sell that product, if it's not a good business decision, sometimes that means that you can't do it because it just doesn't make fiscal sense. And then community. So community is the basis of all cultures. And strong communities are the only ways to build strong, positive cultures within an organization as well. And it's also really important to note that communities and cultures are what can help spread good as well. So cultural diffusion is what you see a lot when you go around the world, which is everything from linguistics and food. You see culture spreading. The U.S. is hugely culturally diffusive when it comes to everything that it's taken in. And I see strong company cultures around community as a powerful force for good because of that diffusive nature of organizations like United by Blue that can actually cause the behavior around single-use plastics potentially to change, or be at least a small part of it. And then team. It all ties together with a team. If you don't have a strong team, you don't have a strong culture, you can't have a strong company, and you can't have any results. The one unifying factor of all of these core values is, in my opinion, honesty. They are all rooted in a culture of being honest. So, keeping on the business topic now, staying out of politics for a little bit, honesty is also a currency. In business especially, I see honesty as something that has the ability to support financial gain. So when it comes to employees, honesty results in better productivity and loyalty out of employees. We believe in transparency, in sharing as much information as we deem necessary at the company, and in that way we get better productivity and loyalty out of the employees, which is obviously a good thing for the company. Customers. Being honest with customers is the surest way to build loyalty and advocacy, and it's far more valuable than any form of paid advertising. So essentially, anytime we have an issue, we try to be honest about it. We had a big fiasco with shipping our last end of season sale, and we moved warehouses and sent out an email to the 5,000 or so customers that had bought in that week period, and basically was just honest about the situation. Said, this is what happened. We moved warehouses. We shit the bed. And I'm sorry. And it actually ended up creating a lot more advocate customers than if we had not said anything at all. And then investors. So investors won't come close to anything that has any sense of dishonesty. So I've been able to leverage our honest currency at United by Blue to raise considerable capital for the company. And that's been one of the things that's helped fuel our growth. So not only does that allow us to then grow the company and create value for shareholders, for myself, for people at the company, but it also allows us to do more good through our mission. The more we're able to basically grow the company, the more good we do, and the more jobs we create, and the more potential that we have to be a long-lasting, sustainable company in the long run. All of these things are only possible with honesty. So this is the dilemma that I have oftentimes with honesty, though. As an entrepreneur, you are building a company, and building a company is really hard. And you have more on you than you could have imagined, especially as the company scales, and it never changes. It hasn't changed yet, at least. So in order to be an entrepreneur, you have to throw caution to the wind, and you have to believe in a vision that may or may not be the truth, or may not be the reality of today, because you're believing in something in the future. So this often means that entrepreneurs believe in a fallacy. And it also means that we feed this fallacy to others. It's part of our job. It's to make other people believe in something that may or may not be the reality yet. So I remember when I started, my financial projections, my plans for the future. I mean, man, if those came true, we'd be a billion-dollar company by now, and thousands of employees. Was I dishonest to think that? Was that wrong? is being overly optimistic about a business prospects dishonest or inspiring? Oops. So this also leads into the entrepreneur, the CEO's, the leader's role in maintaining morale or building morale. The challenges with balancing optimism with reality is that our core job is to get people to believe it even when times are tough. This means that when someone asks an entrepreneur, if I'm sure many of you run your own thing as well, if people ask you how things are going, I often see entrepreneurs saying great no matter what. Like, you ask me on any day, I'm going to say great. and that's partially because deep down inside, I am always happy about the business and what we're doing. But it's also because I protect the business's interests, and I just want things to be great. I believe in that so much, even if I just had the worst day or the worst quarter or the worst week. I still believe in the sense of the business being great, and I see that with a lot of other people. Or for instance, in the past, if I'm going to struggle to make payroll, am I going around and telling everybody that, or am I doing everything I can to make it happen? Or if people ask, how's it going? I'm doing everything I can to make it happen. Or in the first 2 years when our office was near here, 12th and Callowhill, and I lived in a closet in the office on an air mattress for 2 years. And I would wake up early and go to the gym and shower and try to get back and look like I was coming into the office. Did I want people to know, or did I tell people something that wasn't the truth about where I lived? Hey, where do you live, Brian? Oh, I live somewhere up, in the Northeast. Or do I want to protect and make people feel inspired to come into work, not thinking that they're coming into where I slept the night before? I don't know. I don't have the answer to that, but I just know that what my definition was to make it seem otherwise. So this is only good in moderation. I think that oftentimes businesses get into a predicament when they spin their own web of lies. And for me, telling people that I don't live in the office seems rather harmful. Again, on the topic of honesty, is it honest? No. But there's when those compound into something bigger and worse, on the scale of what you see in business oftentimes when you read the news, whether or not that's Enron or Madoff or any of these issues with companies that you read about, they probably started small. And so one thing that I recognize is we have to know when to cut. We have to know when to stop, when to cut the losses, when to be honest, when to tell people the truth. And that's the entrepreneur's dilemma as well, is knowing when to balance the truth with optimism and transparency. So knowing when to shut down a part of the business that's not working, knowing when to scale back on financial projections. When I say that we're going to do X and we're getting towards the end of the year and there's no way we're going to do that, standing up in front of the company and saying, we're not going to do that. Knowing when to fire someone, knowing when to do anything in any parts of life, knowing when to break up with somebody, knowing when to leave, knowing when to move. All of these things have to be done in order to avoid a false reality in the future. So, in summary, just as expected, this is a pretty deep topic which can't be covered in the short amount of time that we have here. There's so many layers of truth. And the most challenging part of knowing when honesty is the best policy is defining and uniting around a policy a shared construct of how we communicate honestly. And that might be different for everybody. But it doesn't mean that we're dishonest. It means that we need to learn how to communicate. So, unfortunately, in today's cultural climate, we've been thrust with a culture of overt dishonesty. And to me, it's really important that we have these dialogues, because getting on the same page about what it means to be honest and understanding other people is probably the most important thing of the foreseeable future that we need to focus on as not only a country, but as humanity as a whole. Thanks.